why don't you both, Michelle, raise your hand so we know which one is Michelle, and Noble, start by explaining what you do. Michelle?
Great. So I am a behavioral health support specialist. I work in the Lake Washington School District. I serve 2 middle schools, and I provide mental health counseling, substance abuse prevention and intervention. And I'm also the member of our team who responds to the majority of our requests for suicide risk assessments.
And we must emphasize, you said middle school.
Yes.
Drug abuse, substance abuse, mental health, and suicide.
Yeah.
Middle school is what age?
Middle school grades 6 through 8, so 11 to 14. I do the suicide risk assessments from kindergarten through high school.
Kind of scary that we need that in middle school, don't you think? Noble, how about you?
I am a co-occurring disorders therapist, so that means I work with youth who have both mental health and substance use issues occurring at the same time. I coordinate a recovery group at YES, I do individual counseling, and I also do outreach therapy at Emerson High School in Kirkland.
Could you explain some of the trends that you're seeing, Noble?
Always at the top of the list when it comes to substance use with kids, we've got the big 3. We've got nicotine, we've got alcohol, and we've got cannabis use. And since cannabis became legalized in our state, the perception of risk has gone way down, so the use has skyrocketed. But then we also see other substances. We see plenty of opioids, still starting with prescription opioids, still progressing to heroin, and methamphetamines are continually a growing concern in our community. In the wake of the opioid epidemic, a lot of people forget that methamphetamine use is actually more prominent and growing at a higher rate than heroin use.
That's pretty scary.
It is
especially
scary.
when you put faces on the numbers.
Exactly.
Michelle, what about you in terms of mental health issues that you're seeing?
Yeah, so the primary mental health issues that we see are anxiety, depression, lots of suicidal ideation, and the amount of anxiety and the ways in which it presents just seems to continue to skyrocket and to expand. I have 7th graders sit in my office say they're worried about being successful in their careers. And I think about, like, your career right now is to be a 7th grader, but they have this sense of pressure and of a need to achieve that is overwhelming to a 12 or 13-year-old.
And I don't think people, remember I said earlier, we all have stuff. So we all kind of buck up and deal with our stuff. Some of us not too successfully, I bet, as adults, but I don't think we understand how a young person processes that. And I'm thinking right now of a young person dear to me. She's actually not as young as she used to be. She just turned 21, but she admits she's depressed. She's talked about suicide. She struggles daily just to get through the day. What's going on? I don't know if you have the answers, but what's causing all of this?
Yeah, there are a variety of factors that are impacting youth. I think about some societal factors, like the size of families has gotten smaller over the past century. So, 100 years ago, if you had a family on a farm with 2 parents and 8 kids, that's 100 different relationships in a family. And now if you have a single parent with 1 child, there's 1 relationship in a family. And, there's bound to be conflict between adolescents and their parents. And so in a family where there's 1 relationship, that feels like the family is falling apart, whereas if you had 100 relationships, there's room to have other people you're connected with and feel loved and appreciated by. There's the impact of social media. There is a pressure for achievement, to have high grades, to have all your work turned in on time. Parents are able to check online grade books incessantly. Students are able to check online grade books incessantly. Pressure to get into college, and then all the things that we were probably used to as adolescents of just, wanting to fit in, figuring out who you are, all of those factors. And it just feels like it kind of creates a perfect storm.
Yeah.
Michelle touched, go ahead.
I was going to say, the teen years have always been famous for emotional upheaval, the Sturm and Drang. I challenge anybody in here to recall a single day in your teenage years where your emotions weren't doing something like this. And now that we've got social media, now that we've got so much more information, These kids are learning all of the stressors that we as adults deal with. We think of kids as being very narcissistic and self-centered. They are smart, they are observant, and they're little empathy machines. They absorb our stress. They see the things we're worried about. I've got clients coming in and having full-blown panic attacks about global warming, about people struggling in North Korea, and they can't do anything about that. They can't vote, they can't drop out of school and go solve the world's problems, and they certainly can't get away from feeling like if they don't look exactly perfect, it's going to be the end of the world. That's very much a perfect storm.
It's pretty heavy stuff, and those young people don't realize that some of us adults deal with similar little struggles. We don't get quite so dramatic, but we all have our stuff.
Well, we've got fully developed brains. They don't. They literally don't have the brain to be able to cope. They definitely don't have the coping skills because they're still learning them.
And then they're in an environment where their world is a big impact. I want to share with you a part of an interview that Nick Sheff did with a guy named John Levitt. He has a website called The Fix. It's about addiction and recovery. I don't know if you're familiar. I just want to read one part of it because for those of you who haven't seen the movie, and it's a really good, well-done movie that looks at relapse and how it's just not so simple to go to treatment, and explains why some people go to treatment many times and fail out of treatment because methamphetamines in this case has a different impact on the brain. But this is one of the things that he was saying about the movie and why they took that approach. Okay, I'm just getting phone calls here. He's talking about the relapse that many people experience when they first try to get sober. The cycle of relapse caused by the pain of being without the drugs and having to face your feelings. When the pain comes, we reach out to the one thing that we know has kind of made us happy for so long, and we end up relapsing. As soon as we take the drugs again, they immediately take hold and we can't stop. I felt the process of relapsing had never been depicted in films. So let's talk about, you were touching on, Noble, the brain. Mm-hmm. And in this movie, Nick's father learns about meth and what it does to his child and sees pictures of the brain and how for many of these addictions, there's a recovery rate of 1% because of what happens to the brain. Can you talk more about that?
So, without going into an entire lecture on brain chemistry, basically what's going on is any substance use forces the brain to release chemicals that cause an immediate emotional reaction, generally very positive ones. In the case of crystal meth, we're talking about feeling of rush, of well-being, of excitement, of engagement, of power. And for somebody who's struggling with depression, anxiety, trauma, we feel like victims to our emotions. The ability to be able to just swallow something, inhale something, shoot something up, and have our emotions change almost that fast is incredibly empowering. It creates this illusion of control that nobody wants to give up.
Kind of like happy hour on steroids, it sounds like.
Yep, pretty much. And then once people want to stop doing that, they have to deal with, people going into recovery have to deal with a long, protracted time where their brain is trying to get back to baseline. And their baseline wasn't very great if they were struggling with depression or anxiety. Without steady support, without therapeutic support, without learning the skills, that road to recovery can seem absolutely impossible. And in times of hopelessness, the temptation to go back to what worked, to what gave us that feeling of power and relief, is really, really tempting.
I want to jump back to you now, Michelle, because you're dealing with intervention. And again, you deal with middle school. Mm-hmm. So based on what Noble just explained, how do you recognize, I mean, are you actually dealing with some of the beginnings of what she's talking about in middle school?
We do see the beginnings of this in middle school, and I'll say that even for students who are not using what we consider really strong drugs or some of the substances that we have huge concerns about, we know that even nicotine use in middle school is correlated with higher degrees of anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and other substance use. And so when this is the benefit of early intervention and being in schools, being where children are. So when, for instance, a student is referred to me, having been caught vaping or juuling at school, we do a full assessment, both of their substance use and of their mental health. And very often we uncover that there are underlying issues that if we address, we may be able to head off a descent into further substance use. We might be able to address some of the underlying needs and be able to give them the skills to cope with the stressors that they're facing so that they do have ways to get through their days and to feel that sense of empowerment and strength and capability without turning to substances.
I want to stick on the vaping sub. Does everyone know what vaping is? Does everyone know what Juul is? Is everyone aware of the significance of what Michelle is talking about? This is a big problem that I think a lot of parents may not, and nieces and grandparents and aunts and uncles may not even think is a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think, and I refer to them as electronic cigarettes because they are electronic nicotine delivery systems. It is projected to be a $60 billion industry within the next 5 years, so it's massive. And a lot of students think it's relatively harmless, it's not that big of a deal, but the tobacco companies are losing customers left and right, and they are aware of the neuroplasticity that Noble was just talking about, and know that our young people are really their best market for getting new customers. And so they market these products that students can customize. They can put little decals on their devices. There are flavors that are aimed specifically for youth. And it's a way for youth to rebel, to try something new, to get over boredom. And like Noble was just saying, the first experience with nicotine can be a very powerfully positive one. And they have a sense of like focus and energy. But as with any addiction, over time, your experience of the substance just is never the same. And they end up encountering problems with, attention and, addiction that end up being really problematic for them.
We are wrapping up, so I'd just like to get from each of you one final message to our audience today.
For me, that would be to talk about all of this stuff. Let's continue to work towards destigmatizing mental health and substance use. These are conversations that work best when we have them frequently, casually, commonly. We should be talking about this because we care about each other. No human being is an island. We take care of ourselves as we take care of other people.
Yeah. I think my overall message would just be that every single one of us has a role to play. You don't need to be a mental health professional to be able to help decrease the stigma around mental health and substance use. You can learn to, just attend carefully to the people in your lives and notice when they're struggling and help connect them to the professionals and the self-help kind of strategies that can really help everybody turn a corner.
Well, thank both of you as representatives of YES for doing the work you do. It isn't easy, we understand that, and you've been very committed.